All right, we're here with the greatest pollster in Rhode Island and Eyewitness News political analyst Joe Fleming. Joe, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
All right, let's dive right into the head-to-head matchups. What everyone wants to talk about. Should Congressman Cicilline be concerned?
If I'm David Cicilline, I would be concerned about my re-election. The polling data that we have, we polled 2 races with David Cicilline in it against John Laughlin and against Brendan Doherty. In both races, he's trailing by double digits. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that 17 months out from the election, David Cicilline has just gone through 3 or 4 months of very bad press over the city of Providence, and I think that reflects in this poll greatly. But if I'm David Cicilline, I have a great deal of concern for my re-election at this time.
Where can he make up for lost ground?
Well, right now it looks like in both races, he trails badly among the senior citizens, the voters over the age of 60, which was a strong group for David Cicilline last year. But now these people seem to have abandoned him. However, it's a group that I believe he can still get back. It's a group where the Democratic message of Social Security and Medicare plays really well to these voters. So I would think as the campaign goes on, David Cicilline will try to stress these types of things. And again, we're still way out in politics. 17 months is a real long time, so things can change greatly. But it gives Dave Cicilline an opportunity to make changes and redefine his message.
So do what he did in the first campaign, and that is raise concerns about about Republicans coming after their Medicare.
It's a traditional Democratic angle that they use, going after the Medicare and the Social Security, portraying the Republicans as somebody who's going to hurt them. And I think that's what you want to see David Cicilline do. He'll try to paint John Laughlin or Brendan Doherty as very conservative Republicans who will take away things that the senior citizens have in Rhode Island now.
You know, looking at the numbers, comparing Brendan Doherty, comparing John Laughlin, they matched up pretty similar to David Cicilline. So is this the anyone but Congressman Cicilline vote?
Well, right now at this point, it looks like the voters of Rhode Island are upset with David Cicilline more than voting for Brendan Doherty and John Laughlin. So I think this is more of an anti-Cicilline vote at this time. And again, voters' minds have changed, and you can make up a 12 or 13-point deficit in a short amount of time. Keep in mind, last year in the election, John Robitaille was in the low teens about a month out from the election, and he came within 2 percentage points of being governor of the state of Rhode Island.
You know, 17 months out here, right? And
right.
Your poll shows that the undecideds really aren't as high as one might expect. What do you make of it?
Well, the undecideds are around 20% in this poll. 1 out of 5 voters aren't sure who they're going to vote for. Again, I think part of it is simply, as you just said, Tim, it's people saying, I don't want David Cicilline at this point. They're upset with David Cicilline, so they're voting for John Laughlin and Brendan Doherty. In the poll, we find out that neither one of these people are a household name in the sense people, they may know the name, but they don't know much about them, but they're voting for them.
Now, why isn't John Laughlin a household name? Here's a guy who dumped a lot of money in November, even before that, in a race against David Cicilline. Why isn't his name recognition higher?
Well, his name recognition is about 53% at this point. But what happens is people may know the name, but they don't really know much about him, so they don't give an opinion whether they like him or dislike him. Also, when we asked the question, we said, you know, what's your opinion of John Laughlin, favorable or unfavorable? People may not remember John Laughlin was the guy who just ran against David Cicilline. If we prefaced it by saying former candidate for Congress, John Laughlin, I bet it will be a lot higher. But this gives us a good idea of how many people really know him the way we asked this question.
And of course, that's not what they put on the ballot when you go into the
Correct.
booth, so you're not going to put.
John Laughlin.
And same with Brendan Doherty. The poll didn't ask
Colonel
right. Brendan Doherty. So you suspect if we had that Colonel title before the name.
Yeah, if we said State Police Colonel Brendan Doherty, I assume his name recognition would be a lot higher, and people would have other impressions of him. But even though his name recognition is low, under 50%, he's still well received by the people who do know him.
Let's talk back to the head-to-head matchups. Yep. Congressman Cicilline's stronghold has always been with the Democrats. How did he fare with them?
He's still doing well with the Democrats. He receives about 64% of the vote of the people who say they are Democrats in this poll. However, that's down about 15% from our poll last October, right before the election, where he was getting 79% of the Democratic vote. So the Democrats are pretty much staying with him, but he has lost a little ground there, so that has hurt him some. The big area that has hurt him, Tim, is the independent voters. Right now, he's only receiving about 14% of the independent vote.
Yikes.
And John Laughlin is receiving like 62% of the independent vote. Brendan Doherty is receiving about 60% of the independent voters. in the last survey we did, October, David Cicilline was receiving about 27% of that vote.
Well, he's never really been the darling of the independent voters.
No. The surveys we did last year for WPRI TV showed David Cicilline had a weakness with independent voters and, of course, Republicans. He was winning his election based on the Democratic voters in the race.
And senior citizens.
And senior citizens. And that's what got him into office. The other thing also that helped last time was it was a four-way race. Two other candidates received like 5% of the vote, but he only won by 6%. So the more candidates in the race, the better I think it will help David Cicilline.
What do the numbers say to you about Brendan Doherty? Is he, for voters, is he a blank slate?
Well, in the head-to-head, he's doing very well against David Cicilline. However, he's a blank slate in the sense we asked a favorability question. Do you have a positive or negative opinion of Brendan Doherty? 52% of the voters could not answer that question. They said they didn't know. But of the voters who did answer the question, Brendan Doherty is perceived very well. His negative in this poll is only 5%, which is very low. And he had a favorable rating of 43%. You wouldn't expect Brendan Doherty to have much of a negative rating as the colonel of the Rhode Island State Police, a very well-respected organization.
And someone who's gotten a lot of positive press.
Exactly.
They arrest bad guys, and you see Brendan Doherty's
Right.
face on there. As he starts to define where he stands on the issues, do you expect that negative rating to increase?
I would expect it to increase in the sense that people right now don't know where he stands on the issues. People don't know where he's on abortion, where he's on gay marriage, the social type issues. People don't know where he's in the budget deficit, Social Security, Medicare. As that comes out, some people may start thinking less favorable of Brendan Doherty. At the same time, I think David Cicilline will try to define Brendan Doherty and John Laughlin also as two very conservative Republicans, which would raise their negative rating. The first congressional district, in my mind, is more of a moderate type district, not so much of a very conservative district. I think the second district right now is more conservative than the first. And that helped David Cicilline last year, being more of a moderate district, and John Laughlin being perceived as more of a very conservative Republican. But I would think Brendan Doherty has the opportunity here to really enhance his own image too. If he gets out there fast and begins doing this, people don't really know much about him. If he tells the Brendan Doherty story early, that could help him keep his negatives down as the campaign moves on.
So in an effort for him to move the needle, we're talking about Brendan Doherty here, should we expect a lot of advertisements just pointing at his history with law enforcement and painting that image of a tough guy?
I think you're going to see Brendan Doherty portray himself as a tough guy, law enforcement, honesty, integrity, somebody that you can trust. I think that's the type of image Brendan Doherty wants to get out there. And by saying those things, he's sort of possibly betraying David Cicilline as somebody, well, can you really trust him? Because did he tell you the truth about the city of Providence? And if Brendan can get himself with a trust image out there first and really establish that, that could really help him in this campaign.
One of the things that John Laughlin had trouble doing was raising money nationally in a race against Congressman Cicilline, and we've talked about possibly that would have been the thing that pushed him over the edge if he had just gotten a little more money. What do these numbers, and maybe it's too early to say, mean for the prospect of being able to shake that tree in Washington, D.C. to get some fundraising?
Well, I think the first thing is the Republican Party, if there's a primary, they're not going to put money into it to after the primary to see who wins the primary.
Will it be too late by then?
Not necessarily. I mean, we only have a short window of 7 or 8 weeks between the primary and the general election. However, if they see David Cicilline is still very weak at that time, this is a seat considered safe Democrat they possibly could pick up. They would put the money in. The thing is, however, it would be better if that money started to come early, where either John Laughlin or Brendan Doherty can start building their base, having campaign funds to do what they need to do. But I think you're going to see both Laughlin and Doherty really work from here on in trying to raise that money and accumulate a campaign war chest, not spend it early.
You know, we've been talking about a primary with the Republicans. Do these numbers tell you that we should also expect a primary against David Cicilline?
I wouldn't be surprised if a Democrat files against David Cicilline. But keep in mind, he's still doing very well among the Democrats. So he could be okay in a primary. Plus, David Cicilline does very well with the liberal voters in the state of Rhode Island. Democratic primaries tend to have more liberal-type voters coming out to vote. So that could work in his favor in a primary. I think David Cicilline will be a lot harder to beat in a Democratic primary than in the general election. But again, it's still very early, Tim. Things change a lot in 17 months.